Welcome back to Unwarp Reality. It's been a little while. So, just to remind you, this is a podcast designed to help us see not through, but around the looking glass. Our aim is to help unpack the manipulation and bias prevalent in mainstream media reporting. If you're curious for more background, please listen to episode 1, where we discuss in greater detail our motivation and goals for the project. You can find it on our Substack or YouTube channels under Unwarp. That's UNWARP reality. I'm Liz, a cybersecurity specialist, cultural anthropologist, and world traveler calling in from New York City.
Yeah, I think you're more of a domestic traveler lately. We've had to take a little bit of a break because you've been jetting around to some fabulous places for conferences.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I've been to Denver and Pittsburgh, but I wouldn't really call them fabulous. But they were nice, good break, and hopefully, I can make it to an international destination again soon.
Excellent. Me too. So I'm Bekah, psychologist, leadership coach, and social critic coming to you from Chicago. Great to have you back with us. So if you want to know a little bit more about who we are, you can check out the bio page on our Substack. In the last episode, we broke down the biased coverage of the Amy Wax case as presented by Vox. Today, we're going to look at a combination of sources to explore the hyperbole and bizarre presentation of information in some stories about animals.
Right. And so we've previously highlighted the role of word choice in manipulating your interpretation of events. So I guess we'll start again by looking at some headlines. So you want to do the honors?
Sure, here's a few. From an old standby of garbage reporting The Atlantic, the aftermath of a mass slaughter at the zoo, and a newbie in terms of our critique, the USA Today, America's birds are under siege.
Okay, wait a minute. Hold on. They're under siege. So what? We should call Seagal?
Oh my gosh, 100%. And also, might I note, a totally underrated action classic.
What? What are you talking about? Under Siege is definitely not underrated. I think it has like the critical appreciation that it deserves. But I guess if the birds are under siege, we better get Seagal on the phone. I mean, we've got a mass slaughter here. We've got these birds to worry about. So what are we gonna do?
Yeah, I mean, these headlines are pretty extreme. So the words were obviously chosen to attract the attention of the reader. And this is classic manipulation by the media, which of course is to be expected because headlines are supposed to grab the reader's attention. But the problem is that such catastrophization works to stir up strong emotional responses to issues that could probably be better processed with a cooler head. And as we've discussed, the hyperbole in the headlines is an additional issue because most people don't actually read into the full article, which may or may not, in the case of some publications lacking journalistic integrity, include a more nuanced representation of the information that is necessary to fully understand the issue. So, based on these headlines, one would probably be left with the impression that there's mass extinction taking place with animals in the US.
Yeah, and I mean it is some pretty bad stuff, right? Like slaughter. I'm thinking like blood, guts, gore everywhere, like some kind of slasher flick come to life. And if that's true, I mean that could be very devastating and disturbing. And then I don't know, under siege, right? Like I'm thinking trapped, some kind of onslaught, like a deliberate and sustained effort to destroy something or like win against your enemy by holding them captive for long enough until they starve.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Like thinking the siege of the Troy, for example. So these terms are designed to evoke a lot of emotion. We think about frenzied violence, suffering, loss, persecution, all bad things that we generally like to avoid. But they imply agency, that there's an intentional actor, a perpetrator. Some malevolent individual is doing the slaughtering or doing the besieging.
Yeah, right. You got to have a bad actor in this case. So like who are the birds under siege from? Let me guess. Is it Ron DeSantis again or some other non-woke ogre? Do they even tell us?
No, sadly, it is not Ronnie D this time.
Oh
But of
man.
course, there is a Florida connection. Here's what the
Okay.
article tells us. These birds are, quote, imperiled by habitat loss, disease, and other threats. Several incidents this spring illustrate a few of the hazards. In Florida in April, state wildlife officials charged two men with shooting and killing colorful migratory cedar waxwings, including a blueberry farmer who was trying to keep them off his bushes. Also in Florida, a man was charged with driving a golf cart into a flock of American black skimmers on the beach, killing five birds.
Okay, wait, hold on. So we got a blueberry farmer trying to keep some birds off the plants from which he makes his livelihood, and then like what, some other idiot like he drove a golf cart and killed five birds. I mean, was it intentional, or like was he just being kind of a jackass?
I don't know. I mean, probably like combination of drunk and golf court and beach, but anyway, they don't really tell us the details about that incident. Neither one of those two things, people killing some waxwings and this guy killing some black skimmers on the beach, provides evidence backing up the claim, though, that birds are under siege. Five dead birds may be undesirable, but it hardly constitutes a siege. And it's also very localized, right? So it's not clear how this relates to a statement in the headline claiming that America's birds are under attack. This magnification borders on delusional.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, so you've got two cases of two people killing a couple of birds. Like, I'm assuming those are isolated incidents for both of them. But aside from that, the article goes on to tell us that it's hard to quantify. This is a quote. It's hard to quantify which birds are most threatened. And another quote, many birds continue to decline without scientists being able to identify a specific cause, despite decades of research and conservation. So, like, we don't even know which birds are most threatened or what the cause of them being threatened is. So I don't know, maybe I'm nuts, but usually for a siege to be taking place, you kind of expect, like, one specific group or area kind of being targeted. So like being besieged, and then I guess like a specific group, or I don't know, maybe even an individual. It seems impossible, but like doing the sieging, right? Like there's got to be a clear pattern of behavior of like one group trapping and causing harm to another. I
Yeah,
don't know.
there's nothing of the kind is outlined in this article. And this lack of explanatory detail is intentional and necessary, right? Without a real siege taking place, they need to manufacture one from these fragmentary claims. So another thing that the article notes is, quote, birds with very restricted ranges, such as the Kirtland's warbler, are inherently at risk. Natural disasters and disease outbreaks could take out that population much more easily than a species that is more widely distributed, end quote. So here causes like natural disasters and diseases, which are not planned, not intentionally designed to target a specific population, are being given as potential reasons for a siege taking place to target these potentially more vulnerable bird populations.
Wait, okay, so okay, what? So, okay, sorry, this one just so it's interesting or useful potentially, right? Like especially if you're a fanatic with like a vested interest in the survival outcomes of the Kirtland warbler. But is the issue more that that bird has some restrictions on where it can live and how it survives, rather than the fact that it's being targeted by someone? There's no concrete evidence here. There's just general processes being cited to support this inference that the birds are the target of some kind of confluence of sinister forces. Like from what I've seen, there's nothing in the article that backs up the headline at all.
No, absolutely not. Right. What we have learned is that there are many potential variables at play, some of which are not fully understood, and many of which are facts of nature. Natural selection and the outcome of evolution sometimes result in certain species suffering from increased vulnerability to certain environmental conditions. This again is an idea that might be of interest, but it should not be connected with a sense that there's a malevolent agent at work undermining bird safety and security. So in the article, we're not provided with clear evidence of a siege or even a clear understanding of why some species are declining, well, with the exception of a couple of guys, who are targeting birds in Florida.
Okay, well, I guess we're gonna have to not call Steven Seagal for this one. Kind of sad because I was looking forward to meeting him, but
He's probably
it's a
available too.
Well, you know what? We'll save it for next time. So I guess let's move on to that other insane headline that you mentioned earlier.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So for a refresher, should we read it again?
Yeah, definitely.
The aftermath of a mass slaughter at the zoo.
I mean, like, okay, sorry. I just find this one so laughable. Not least because I'm sitting there imagining the author when they were typing this up and like it like just feeling how dramatic they wanted to make it. I don't know. I can only imagine what nonsense is going to be in the article after such a start like that. But all right, let's get into some details.
Yeah, it's definitely a good one. But first of all, the slaughterer is
I mean, I'm a deranged Floridian.
no, it is a fox. Yes,
Oh,
an
oh,
animal.
oh, okay.
And as the article notes, the fox was likely the father of some newborn kits who was looking for food for his offspring.
Okay, wait. So like a completely normal part of nature. And actually, I mean, to be fair, if the fox father wasn't out hunting for food for his kids, they'd probably be calling to send him to jail for child support or something, right?
Oh yeah, 100%. And how very woke of you, right? You're recognizing that there's no way that the fox can win in this situation. But more importantly, you're pointing out a huge problem with this article, which is the rampant anthropomorphization designed to evoke more emotion and outrage in the reader.
Right, and that is present from that very invocation of the term slaughter. So, all right, let's get into some more details about how the slaughter takes place.
Okay, before we can get to the main event, though, let's just take a quick step out and think a little bit about the setting and some of the language used to frame the story. So, the author at the beginning discusses how the zoo,
Okay, Smithsonian Zoo, right?
yeah, so in Washington, D.C., and the zoo is situated within a larger park. So, in order not to, in the author's words, quote, interrupt the wildlife corridors, unquote, the zoo's exterior edges are porous.
Okay, so essentially the wildlife in the area can roam more or less freely into or through the zoo itself. And I'm guessing that there's some kind of regulation and enclosure so that the wild animals can't actually get into the spaces with the zoo animals.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so within the article, the author presents this very oddly inconsistent viewpoint on both supporting animals to act as they naturally would, but constraining animal behavior. And we'll get to some of this as we move forward. There's a lot of pejorative descriptions related to keeping animals in the zoo. But if we kind of focus on the fox, here's where we get some really interesting choices for the language that is being used. So I'm just going to read this full sentence and then we can respond and unpack. If, for instance, a fox indulges his darker vulpine impulses and hunts the zoo's animals, he will swiftly be brought to justice.
Okay, like what? All right, I'm sorry. Okay, what darker vulpine impulses? Like what does that even mean? And what he's going to be brought to justice? Like what are they talking about? If a fox acts like a fox doing totally normal fox things, then who? I mean, who's even going to bring him to justice? I don't even understand what this means. And like indulges his darker impulses. I mean, is he indulging anything? Like, I thought he was just trying to find some food for his kids. Like, does this author think that the fox has the ability to control the impulse to find food? I mean, just like, wow.
Right. Again, all of those verb choices and descriptors are absurd anthropomorphization. But like we haven't even gotten to the slaughter yet, right? So the author goes on to tell us about the flamingos, which are going to be the target of the slaughter, in the zoo have had their flight feathers removed. So they're now incapable of flying away from a predator, obviously, so they don't escape from the zoo. So, of course, there's a discussion of how immoral this is because it, quote, shrinks a bird's world.
Okay, so like, we're not going to get into a moral discussion of zoos here on this episode, but it sounds like, from the author's point of view, so the zoo animals are, in some sense, being denied their true way of existing, but then at the same time, the fox should deny himself that? I, I don't know. I'm confused.
Well, it has a very dark vulpine nature.
Right, right. Yes, of
But
course.
again, right, you're pointing out this huge inconsistency. So here's another one of my favorite lines, right? And there's tons of gems of absurdity in this one. But the author tells us, quote, grounded birds are more vulnerable to mass slaughter.
What? Like, no, they're not. Okay, sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for these birds that they're easy prey, but the way that's written is just so laughable. If a bird that usually flies can't, I definitely agree that it's probably more vulnerable as prey, but the leap from that to then a group of them being vulnerable to mass slaughter is just totally hyperbolic. Like, as though that's a real situation where like loads of birds uh, are rendered flightless, and then what they're the slaughterers are like roaming around trying to search them out. I don't know. I don't
Yeah,
even understand.
it's very bizarre because, like you're saying, it presumes that somehow there are animals that are cognizant of the fact that these birds have had their flight feathers removed, and they're just like waiting for the opportunity to pounce and kill them all. It's insane, right? So then the author goes on to describe in detail their perception, and by that I mean wild imagination, about how the fox interrogated the defenses of the enclosure housing these flamingos and tested its theories of vulnerability as it broached the enclosure.
Okay, this reminds me of those assignments from like middle school. Remember that? Like you read Call of the Wild or Old Yeller or something, and they're like, write a paragraph from the perspective of the dog. So in this case, write a paragraph from the perspective of a fox. It's just like it's so it's so sad.
Yeah, yeah, that is legit what this is. And I mean, the level of cognitive complexity is that of a child. So it might be somebody's junior high assignment. For example, the author speculates that the fox was, quote, feeling playful, like a kit romping around on the den again before pouncing on its prey.
Okay, wait, hold on. So first of all, he knows how the fox was feeling, and then second of all, like the fox is capable of nostalgia. Is that even possible? He's like remembering the days of yore when he was just a young kit romping around in the den. I mean, what is this guy talking about?
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, the fox is probably mourning its favorite toy that it lost on a camping trip or something while that's happening too.
Oh,
But
sad.
again, like, so what is even more incredible and problematic from the perspective of what we focus on this podcast is that this article is labeled as science by The Atlantic.
Science? This is not science, it's literary fiction. I mean, it's not even good fiction. So it's like they're taking objective events and then they're putting like moral interpretation on top of it, and then pretending like animals have human cognition. None of that is science. I, as a staunch believer in the scientific process, it's quite disturbing what the media has done recently to try to damage the public understanding and trust in that process. So I don't know, this misrepresentation of science is it's very, very damaging. And here we have just a one more example of how they're undermining and undermining and sort of like muddling the true understanding of what science actually is.
Totally, right?
Okay, so all right, so where are we in the story?
Okay, so Fox interrogates the enclosure, goes in and slaughters a bunch of these birds. And
Okay,
then it's just, like chilling, probably like enjoying the fruits of its labor. So the next morning, the zookeeper shows
bathing in
up.
blood. Is he
Right,
bathing in
exactly.
blood?
Blood and feathers. And so the fox is still there when the zookeeper shows up. And then the author claims that the fox ran away, quote, because it seemed to have consciousness of guilt, as if a wild animal has a
What?
sense of human guilt, or it would feel that way after
What?
having secured a meal or done
What?
its fox thing.
I can't even understand that.
I know, it's
Okay,
insane. It's
what
like
like
it
what?
ran away not because it was guilty, but because of a self-protection, preservation instinct, and didn't want to become prey to a larger animal, which is a human. And again, we're
Oh
at this
my
point of
God.
like mixed support for like the animals to be free to act according to their animal nature, which they want the flamingos to do. But then the fox acting on its fox nature somehow needs to be punished. It's totally incoherent.
Well, he's a baddie, so remember how it is. Like the vulnerable ones should be like free to do what they want, and the baddies should be punished and changed. I think it's fitting with the general theme. But all right, so
True.
anyway, aside from these like whatever the absurdity that we've just gone through, let's just cycle back to the initial point, which is the discussion about the use, I guess, overuse, right, of strong language that is just completely not appropriate to describe these events.
Yeah, so slaughter, siege, right? So we discussed that these words imply the presence of an active agent, and that appears to be the case in neither. Natural disasters don't operate with intention. And of course, while animal actions are purposeful, imputing them with human morality and intentionality is not only scientifically inaccurate, it's just absurd, right? So it is, of course, necessary for the media to create much emotional outrage as possible by doing these things, by making these particular word choices.
Right. So the motivation is that, they're going to generate these strong reactions in us without any sort of contemplation of the short or long-term consequences of trying to do that, trying to manipulate us in that way.
Yeah, 100% correct. And then there's also a larger problem that stems from this. Using this type of strong language to describe events to which they are not suited leads to and supports concept creep. When we actually have slaughters and sieges, which thankfully are few and far between, they then have to be described with terms evoking greater and greater levels of harm and catastrophe. So many people, including myself, have written about the tendencies of the media to exacerbate people's sense of pessimism about the world, in part because they consistently report more negative events and with more hyperbolic interpretations.
Yeah, it's like you feel as bad as possible because everything is so horrible and it's never going to get better. And I mean, not only is using those terms like putting subjectivity into what should reasonably expected to be objective reporting. So we could have a scientific description of a fox finding passively held animals, and then attacking, right? We could have some sort of discussion of how to better have the zoo integrated with the surrounding environment, some kind of lessons learned. It's something factual and productive, but instead they want to create this sense of doom and gloom, but it's not even accurately portraying the world that we live in. So uh, reporting on animals and nature, we should keep in mind that there are aspects of that behavior that can and cannot be controlled, right? Animals will behave in a certain way based on their nature, their characteristics, the processes of nature that operate completely outside of these concepts of human agency and cognition. So cultivating these narratives that cause us to feel upset and guilty over such situations, it's maximally unhelpful to our emotional well-being, and it's just not a useful way to understand the human position within the world or even the world itself.
Yeah, 100% correct. And so this is just one of the many reasons why actually avoiding the media can be incredibly beneficial to one's well-being. But people have a desire to be informed. And of course, the media is one source of information. But if we choose to engage with it, we have to make sure that we're equipped with the ability to break down the falsity so we can see through the hyperbole and better understand reality.
Right. Yeah. And as we've said before, and we'll say it again, we can do this for ourselves, but it does take work. So keep putting in the work, everybody. I'm sure you're all doing a great job. And unfortunately, we are out of time for today. So we didn't have a chance to go through both of the articles in full, but they're linked in the episode references. And we encourage you to read them through and see if there's anything else that you might be able to pick out for yourselves. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope you'll join us again as we continue our journey to unwarp reality.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. And if you've got comments, questions, or ideas, different articles that you might want us to break down, send it our way at unwarpreality@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, bye.
Bye.